In this final lecture this semester, we will look at Act 5 of Twelfth Night and try to tie up some loose ends. As you know, comedies rely on the happy resolution of the marriage plot, and this is true of Twelfth Night. Viola may be retiring her page costume, but we're still left with plenty of loose ends, so let's look at some of those now. Let's look at Antonio. He and Sebastian love each other. Antonio goes to bat for Sebastian, and Sebastian, after he started his relationship with Olivia, wants nothing more than to run into his buddy there in Illyria to talk about this. So they have a really, really fast friendship. And in this final act, this love is still reciprocated by Sebastian. So notice this exchange that happens. Sebastian comes on stage and greets Olivia. Olivia has just disclosed to everyone that she's just gotten married to Sebastian. But there's some twin confusion afoot because Sebastian is not on stage when she says this. Cesario is. And so all three of them, Olivia, Duke Orsino, and Cesario, are all very confused and getting very agitated with each other. So Sebastian comes on stage, he greets his new wife, Olivia, and the very next person whom Sebastian acknowledges is Antonio. Oh, my dear Antonio, how have the hours racked and tortured me since I have lost thee. So recall, Antonio gets arrested because he's an outlaw in Illyria, and unbeknownst to Sebastian, Antonio has jumped in the middle of a duel to save him, although in fact it is Cesario, Sebastian's twin. In my humble opinion, Antonio's plot is not entirely resolved. I might have wanted a better ending for this character whom I like so well. On the one hand, Orsino forgives him, so he's not an outlaw anymore, and indeed, Antonio's good nature, I feel, having him there on stage and having Orsino extend this forgiveness toward him, maybe makes the rest of the characters there on stage a little bit more forgiving. Because Orsino also buries the hatchet with Olivia. They are each going to get married to one of the twins. So Orsino kind of slows his roll a little bit, as it were, and he's maybe not so tense. And a few other people seem like they're in especially good nature, and I think it's because Antonio has rubbed off on them a bit. That's what I like to think. A Shakespearean comedy, because especially this one is predicated upon twin confusion, it might have had him couple up with Sebastian's twin sister, who instead marries Count Orsino. But as it is, there's no romantic ending for Antonio. He is one of the three major characters, including Malvolio and Festi, who do not find love. So as we tie up the loose threads in our study of the final act of Twelfth Night, we'll want to think what these three characters have in common, if anything. The twins are reunited in Act 5, and recall that in my last lecture I said this was the quote-unquote couple that we're all hoping gets back together, and albeit not a romantic reunion, but they are twins of the opposite sex. How do the other characters react to seeing this reunion? Duke Orsino says, "One face, one voice, one habit, and two persons. A natural perspective that is and is not." So what he means is, yes, nature has done this, but it also is bizarre and eccentric. Remember what I said in the last lecture, that fraternal twins would have seemed especially strange in this time and place, because the two people are exactly the same, yet quote unquote completely opposite because they are members of the opposite gender. So girl boy twins, like the ones that Shakespeare himself had, would have been thought rare and or strange. And I have referred to this quotation from Antonio before. He says, upon beholding the two twins, "How have you made division of yourself? An apple cleft in two is not more twin than these creatures." Than these two creatures. So while Orsino imagines them as what they share, the one face, one voice, one habit, Antonio pictures it the opposite way, that one person has become two, but ultimately they're examining the same situation just from a different perspective. So it's very touching when the twins speak to each other and reunite, because each has been worried that the other is dead. So they compare notes about their families and realize, yes, we had the same parents and we grew up in the same place. We're twins. Viola tells Sebastian she thinks she's seeing something. He must be some sort of ghost. And he responds with, "A spirit I am indeed, but am in that dimension grossly clad, from which the womb I did participate." So what does he mean by that? He's referring to the fact that, he is a spirit, because ultimately, deep down, what's important about a person is their soul. But then he's also grossly clad in the flesh that he acquired in his mother's womb, which Viola knows all about this because she was there. So if you're like me, reading this play or watching this play, there are so many references to artificiality and how the stage both represents and creates reality, and we're all confused about what's real and what's not. Sebastian joins the conversation in Act 5 and says a couple of really profound things, or should I say there's a couple of really profound things contained in that comment. If he's clad in his flesh, what does that say about other human beings, about all of us? Are all of us ultimately important for our spirits or our souls, and then we're just clad in the flesh that we acquire in the womb, and that's just window dressing? That's just a costume we could dispense with, because what's important is what's deep down. So that's really taking the costuming and the artificiality and the question of where a person's identity resides to like a whole new level of depth. But still interesting to think about, because this is something that Shakespeare ponders in this play. Where does human identity reside? Let's turn now to Olivia, in particular with attention to how the other characters interpret her same-sex love for Viola. Sebastian says to her, "So it comes, lady, you have been mistook, but nature to her bias drew in that. You would have been contracted to a maid. Nor are you therein by my life deceived. You are betrothed both to a maid and a man." So what does he mean by this somewhat mysterious remark that he makes to his new wife? So what does Sebastian mean by this? That Olivia originally loved a woman out of lesbian desire due to her natural desires, and then conveniently was drawn to a man who looked like her, like the object of her lesbian desires, i.e. Viola. Or has nature, the quirky force that created the fraternal twins, set everything right in giving Olivia the ideal man? So it's as if nature says, hey, I've got, if that one isn't appropriate, I've got one here on the shelf that maybe you'll be interested in, or will be more quote unquote appropriate for you. And to make things even more confusing, Sebastian just comes onto the stage in Act 5 and really packs a wallop in everything that he says. He tells Olivia that she is betrothed to a maid and a man. So we think, oh my goodness, is she still split between the two twins, and she loves both of them. It's like, well, that might be possible, and she is going to be Viola's sister-in-law. Or is Sebastian identifying as two people right now? Sort of. I mean, he identifies as one person, but explains that he's got two aspects to his person. What he means is Sebastian is a man, and he puns a little bit to disclose that he is still a virgin, so i.e. a maid. That word, the audience in Shakespeare's time wouldn't have blinked twice of his using that word in that way. It wasn't particular to women, but of course it came to be associated more with women due to social norms about female sexuality over time. So, what happens with Duke Orsino? He claims to love Olivia, but she wants nothing to do with him for the entire play. So, why does he keep pursuing her? Maybe he pursues her precisely because he knows that nothing will come of it, because he does not like women, so he approaches somebody and makes overtures towards somebody who he knows will turn him down. After all, he proves himself to be kind of a misogynist in the way that he interacts with Viola, i.e. Cesario, and discloses that women are not as deep and emotional or strong as men are. I know if I were a fly on that wall, as Viola is underneath that Cesario costume, I would hit the bricks and not want anything to do with Orsino, but I'm not judging Viola's choices. The heart wants what the heart wants. But Orsino, though, throughout the whole play, doesn't seem that interested in making a love match, in that he's still committed to pursuing Olivia. Here we are in Act 5, and Orsino seems pretty angry at Cesario for having betrayed him by getting with his crush, Olivia. And it really hits the fan when the priest comes on stage to say that he married Olivia to this man here, Sebastian, who's not on stage right now. So everybody assembled there, including the priest and Orsino, and Olivia think Cesario was the groom who just got married. Congratulations, Cesario, but it wasn't you who got married. It was your brother, Sebastian. At this moment, Orsino loses his temper really badly and threatens to kill Cesario. So the $1 million question here is it because Orsino still loves Olivia, or is it because he loves Cesario? Let's see how Orsino addresses Viola after the dust has cleared and he's admitted that he fell in love with her, and also that it is socially legitimate because it's disclosed that she is Sebastian's sister. She is a woman. She's not a man named Cesario. He says to Viola, you proclaimed to love me, and thus he asked to see her in her female garb. He says, give me thy hand and let me see thee in thy woman's weeds. So, like, the fact that this is the very first thing that he says after they've, declared their love for each other, on the one hand, it could just be his curiosity because he's only known Viola as Cesario, and his saying this reminds us of that. Or is it that he really needs this to be like legitimate in his mind and in the minds and eyes of everybody there, that it's like, okay, and let me take a deep breath. Once I see you in your female clothing, then everything will be fine. Then we'll be ready to get on with our Shakespearean comedy that is resolved in the successful resolution of the marriage plot. So although the play ends with the twin confusion getting cleared up and the confusion about Malvolio's letter is also cleared up, look at the very, very last lines of the play and how there are still some loose ends hanging here at the end of the very end of the play. So Orsino addresses Viola and says, Cesario, come, for so you shall be while you are a man. But when in other habits you are seen, Orsino's mistress and his fancy's queen. Among the many questions I have about Orsino's relationship with Viola are, does he love Cesario, Viola's twin brother of sorts? What do we make of Orsino's insistence that Viola return to her female form soon? And where's the captain who has Viola's female clothing? This was the captain whom she entrusted her story, and he was in on the plot for her to cross-dress in order to gain entree into Duke Orsino's court. And lastly, curious minds want to know, will the couple keep Viola's male messenger costume? So again, this kind of resonates with the first question here. On what level does Orsino love Viola, or is he in love with Cesario? And if he is in love with Cesario, is it, I love Viola in this male costume, just as an aspect of her gender, a gender performance, or is it same-sex desire that he has toward this person? And part of what makes the play fun is that we don't really know. And I know I'm just happy, although I don't really like Orsino, I'm happy that Viola got what she wanted in the end of the play. So a couple that gets left out sometimes when talking about the romantic ending of Twelfth Night is Toby and Mariah. So who else saw it coming that these two crazy kids would get together? One of the side characters named Fabian explains to the gang who is assembled there on the stage why and how the trick on Malvolio was played, and in talking about that, there's nothing quite like burying the lead. He reveals that Toby has married Mariah because he thought the prank went off so very well. And in a certain sense, try this on for size, we might say that the only real instance of appropriate love is between Mariah and Toby. It's heteronormative. They are members of the same social class. Mariah, even though she works for Olivia, would have to be of gentle birth to have a job like that. And yeah, Toby is Sir Toby, Uncle Toby, a relative of Olivia's, who's there living in her house, not holding down a job of any kind. He is of gentle birth. And, then they're friends and genuinely get along together and have some kind of mojo, some kind of simpatico. They are just clowning around the entire play. There's none of this star-crossed lover stuff for them. So yeah, do we think of them as being like the it couple of this play? I know that I don't, but then I think, yeah, well, they are also friends who then had a romance blossom organically out of that. Speaking of social class, let's turn now to thinking about Malvolio. His desire for social status is viewed as madness by the other characters, or at least they interpret it that way, like knowing good and gosh darn well why he is acting strangely. It's because he's trying to woo Olivia. His letter in Act 5 is brought to the group by Festi, so recall that he is begged for a pen and paper while he was locked away, and Festi reads it to the group. The letter represents Malvolio at this gathering, in which the conflicts are resolved until Malvolio himself shows up on the stage. Olivia summons him to clear up the confusion. And Olivia's first question, funnily enough, is, did he write this? And it's like, oh, Olivia, if you only knew about letters floating around on this stage that weren't written by the people that we thought they were written by. Somebody named Mariah forged the handwriting of somebody named you. So Malvolio comes on stage and he brings with him Olivia's letter and says, "Pray you peruse that letter. You must not now deny it is your hand." So recall what I said, that in Shakespeare's time and place, there were cultural conversations about where human identity was housed, and this conversation entailed locating it in various parts of the body, so like the guts, the heart, and the hand. So hence the turn of phrase, the hand in marriage, and that makes sense given the importance of wedding rings, but also you're not marrying just somebody's hand, you're marrying the entire person. The hand stands in for them. So as I said, it's Shakespeare's comment on where personal identity resides, but in having this scrutiny of the letter happen there in the final act of the play, taking up valuable real estate while all these other couples are getting together, attention to Olivia's hand, which is actually Mariah's because she's forged Olivia's handwriting, draws our attention to a particular person, the author. A text's significance can rely on its author, a text can point back to its author, but as we've seen, this can be faked so easily. And so by having this plot, this kind of B plot regarding Malvolio and the forged letter, be so important and so funny and so well crafted, Shakespeare installs a few loose ends there in the play itself, because you're like, hey, if authorship can be faked so easily, like, what about this play? So on that note, I'd like to turn to the play's subtitle. Not sure if you knew it had a subtitle called What You Will. And this subtitle has many meanings. It calls to mind the randomness and disorder associated with the Christmas season. It means something like, what you will, it'd be like, whatever you want. But whenever, if students, if you want to know the meaning of a word, or you're struggling with interpreting something from a prior period of history that's written in English, open up the Oxford English Dictionary, which is available to us for free via our library resources. So if we look up the word will, you might think, oh, I know what the word will means. It meant a few other things in Shakespeare's time. It meant sexual desire. It meant the sex organs, so both the male sex organ and the female sex organ. So the word willy is still current for the male sex organ, although I usually think of that associated with children and immature people. I don't know of many grown men who use that word. And of course, Shakespeare's name was Will. A bunch of circumstances that cause us to read the following text a little bit differently. I'm going to give that sonnet a read, and keep in mind the various meanings of the word will as I do. And I'm not going to attempt to unpack what this sonnet means, because we'd be here for another 12 weeks, because once you have in mind all of the meanings of will, it could be taken a lot of different ways. But here goes. Whoever hath her wish, thou hast thy will, and will to boot, and will in overplus. More than enough am I that vex thee still, to thy sweet will making addition thus. Wilt thou, whose will is large and spacious, not once vouchsafe to hide my will in thine? Shall will in others seem right gracious, and in my will no fair acceptance shine? The sea all water yet receives rain still, in abundance addeth to his store. So thou, being rich in will, add to thy will one will of mine, to make thy large will more. Let no unkind, no fair beseechers kill. Think all but one, and me, in that one will. So in light of the play's subtitle, I'll ask, should we look at the whole play in a sense as being about Shakespeare's role as an author, in particular as a playwright? Let's consider what one of the side characters, Fabian, says of the prank on Malvolio. If this were played upon a stage now, I would condemn it as an improbable fiction. So the very last of the loose ends that we have to deal with here in Twelfth Night is, indeed, what is the relationship between fiction and reality, between the stage and the world?